Watch this.
Trying to stop the open primaries initiative, Idaho's Attorney General is suing the Secretary of State's office. An office his office also represents. It's got to make it awkward around the State House. We're asking if that's even allowed. From dog walking to DoorDash to driving perfect strangers to the airport, a lot of people are turning to side hustles to help make ends meet. One of Idaho's first Uber drivers says he does it to make friends and make his afternoons a little more fun. Well, if you haven't heard, there's an Olympic Games happening right now in France, but maybe you haven't heard all the French connections we have in Idaho. You're about to hear a few of them. The call is coming from inside the House. That would be the State House. Idaho's Attorney General is suing Idaho's Secretary of State to try to block the open primaries initiative on November's ballot. Idahoans for Open Primaries is also named in that lawsuit as a defendant for what Mr. Labrador claims they did to mislead Idaho voters in the petition process. But the head scratcher in all of this is pitting the two offices that are down the hall from each other, with one of them still allowed to represent the other. The state attorney general is supposed to defend and represent other state government officials, but if he is suing one of them, can he also defend them? How does that work? It's a question asked by Idaho Supreme Court as well, who are expecting to hear this case, and they wanted to get the AG's opinion or his explanation about this apparent conflict of interest. Joe Paris asked a former AG to do the same.
If you look at the legal documents without any context, it would appear that Attorney General Raul Labrador is suing himself. Labrador is suing the Secretary of State's office to keep a voter initiative off the ballot because of constitutional concerns he has. But the Attorney General also represents the Secretary of State. Is this a conflict of interest?
The fact that we have two different positions taken by separate teams of lawyers, both of whom carry the theoretical title of Attorney General, shows you that the system is working that the Attorney General has instituted.
Former Attorney General Dave Leroy says the AG's office laid out a great explanation in new court filings as to why the status quo here should be unchanged.
There are separate teams of lawyers. They are inconsistent in their positions, one representing the general state of Idaho position, one representing the specific wishes of the Secretary of State. And that shows me that there's not a conflict of interest under the rules of professional procedure. The Attorney General has carefully constructed two separate teams. The team representing the Secretary of State is not reporting back to the central office. Its electronic files are separate from those accessible by the Attorney General's office, and they are not communicating back and forth. Instead, the Secretary of State's team is doing exactly what the Secretary of State prefers in his approach to doing his duties.
So to answer the question here, is Labrador suing himself if he is in two different roles in this case?
The Attorney General's office is not suing itself. It is bringing an action on a state constitutional issue that involves mandating or directing duties by the court, if the Attorney General is correct, back to its client.
Some have pointed to a violation of legal ethics, a fair question. But Leroy points out an exception in this case.
There are special provisions that apply to government law firms, where those government law firms have statutory or regulatory duties that mandate them to do certain things for a broad range of clients. In that case, some of those conflict rules have exceptions, and that's what's in play here.
So, just how common is this?
This situation that has arisen is unusual, and the court correctly asked the Attorney General to make a good record of exactly why this is being done and how this is being done. And the Attorney General's reply clearly indicates that our separate teams of lawyers are doing separate interests so that there is no conflict.
At the end of the day, though, it will be up to the Idaho Supreme Court to decide if this is permissible. Brian, as of this point, they have not put down a filing to make a ruling or to verify that this is a good situation, so we'll keep an eye on that.
Okay, a couple questions for you. Did David Leroy have to deal with this while he was Attorney General?
Okay, so I asked him the same question, and long story short, he basically said that when he was the Attorney General, that government was a lot smaller, was a lot simpler. This is a situation that he's had to be a part of before, but Brian, in 2024, it's a lot different of a magnitude, but it is not totally uncommon or unheard of something like this to happen.
Two other instances come up. Idaho Department of Health and Welfare suing Raul Labrador, and Raul Labrador's office suing ITD. So what's the explanation there?
Right, so it can happen, and there are times where a court or his office will say, this is not an appropriate situation for us to basically be doing this at the same time. But in this case specifically, Brian, there is a situation in the sense where Labrador believes that he can keep his staff separate.
Okay.
And at the same time, I asked, what would the remedy be if the Supreme Court doesn't like this? They would have a third party, an independent law firm, come in to be the other side, but the AG would still oversee that. So it's very intricate, but we'll see what the court says.
In those other two cases, that is the case. They have an outside attorney representing Department of Health
Correct.
and Welfare and ITD.
And the ITD lawsuit we keep an eye on. Still no movement on that one. We're expecting some in August.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Well, believe it or not, there was a time before ride-sharing apps made it easier to get around town without your own car. You could walk, ride a bike, jump on a bus, call a cab. Then Uber was unveiled in 2009, offering rides in a stranger's car right at your fingertips. Just pick it up on your phone. That is, if you lived in a big city like New York or San Francisco. Well, it's now available in more than 10,000 cities across 70 countries. That would be Uber. It'd be a bit before Uber hit Boise, but it started a little slow off the line. But it quickly picked up because of the many people who wanted to make money in America's new gig economy. And one of those who was there from the get-go goes by the name Uber Dave. And as Aspen Shumpert found out, he doesn't do it just to pay his bills, but to cover his bar tab.
It's been the same scene for the last 4 years. Dave Yon sits in the same seat at the same bar every afternoon.
All my friends are here. This is my family. I call this my living room.
He knows a lot about all our families. He's always very invested in what's going on with everybody, which is, again, that great sense of community. So we love him here.
Dave spends hours at the Lyft, paying his tab with Uber.
My retirement takes care of all the bills. Uber takes care of my bar bill.
You might say Dave drives to drink.
How you doing?
A gig out of boredom. Already tired of retirement, less than a year into it, Dave took notice of an upstart rideshare company, expanding into Boise in 2014.
They said, yeah, you're all approved. You'll be with the first group of Uber drivers out in Boise. There we go.
Customers didn't exactly roll in at the beginning.
Back then, I might get run right every 2 hours because nobody knew about it.
But quickly picked up.
It only took about 6 to 8 months, and all of a sudden, it started picking up and I was getting a ride an hour type thing. And it's now progressed to where I do 2.5 to 3 rides an hour.
But he doesn't do it for the money.
We crunched numbers a few months ago and take into consideration the depreciation on the car, the maintenance involved, the gas money and everything else. I gross about $22 an hour, but I only net, using real figures, probably $12 an hour.
More for the social interactions.
I mainly do it because I live alone. I get to get out and talk to people.
Were you here for Snowmageddon?
Do you know those little gems people are putting in their teeth?
Oh, no, I haven't heard of those.
No? Oh my goodness.
And them getting to know him too.
So you still drive stick shift? That's awesome.
I still drive a stick. It's all I've driven all my life.
He starts driving in the morning.
So I'll go out at 4 o'clock and I'll do a whole bunch of runs at the airport.
And a few more runs in the afternoon, in time to be done and in his bar seat for the Lyft's happy hour.
And that's my day, and it's the same every day.
To mark his seat, a friend helped him out. They met about 2 years ago.
I wanted to get him something special, which was a plaque with his name.
The name that also marks Dave's car.
This is his spot.
The Lyft being the place Dave walks in every day, from the car to the bar. I reached out to Uber to confirm when Uber Dave started, which was 9.5 years ago. And Brian, they tell me that Uber Dave is a perfect 5-star Uber-rated driver.
That's amazing. Yeah, okay, so he spends hours at the bar afterwards.
Hours.
Hanging out.
Just hanging out.
Making friends there, too.
Yep, and he has one that you saw that they usually sit together every day, but his friend isn't there as much as Dave is.
That's amazing. All right, thank you very much, Aspen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we tend to learn a lot from our viewers, thanks to the back and forth we have here on the 208. Last week, we shared a story about what we believe was Boise's first female mayoral candidate. Esther Marinholtz, in 1933, dubbed herself truly the friend of the worker. Well, she lost that election, but she did stay true to being truly the friend of the worker, showing up and speaking about low wages at several labor meetings over the years, and working with the U.S. Department of Ag to make sure meat was included in food rations. We learned about this woman because of a candidate card a Boise man found in a book he bought at a thrift store. And that story intrigued Dawn enough to send us a message saying, I loved your story about the female Boise mayoral candidate, but there's another great story out there about a Parma, Idaho woman named Laura Stockton Starcher. She headed up the 1916 Petticoat Revolution. Well, Dawn is correct. Laura Stockton Starcher has a legacy in both Oregon and Idaho. And yes, she was part of what was dubbed derogatorily as the Petticoat Revolution in Umatilla. Hunter Funk followed the breadcrumbs to get to the bottom of it.
For this history lesson, we're taking it back to 1916. At this point, women in Idaho and Oregon had the right to vote in local and presidential elections. But women taking a seat in government, a sight rarely seen. Until Laura Stockton Starcher came around.
Laura was born in Missouri, so theirs was a westward settler colonial story. And apparently she was also a homesteader in her own right, and she was Parma's first postal staff. They called it a postmistress at the time.
Laura considered Parma home, but it took leaving the state with her husband Earl to make a national splash.
Laura and her husband lived in Umatilla, Oregon, and he was the mayor. It was all men on the council, and they just kind of let things slide.
Thanks to Laura and her friends, in 1916, the Petticoat Revolution began.
You know, here's this group of women who see a need in their community, and they decide to step up and fill it. The women saw things like the sidewalks were cracked, and the city hadn't paid their power bill, so none of the streetlights were working.
After watching the Umatilla community crumble, Laura met with women in the 200-person town.
They lined out who was going to run for each position and kind of how they would do it, and they all agreed they didn't want the men to know what they were doing. And so they set about very quietly and discreetly generating support from the other women in town.
It's 1916 election.
When the polls opened that morning, the women weren't there. They waited until around 2 in the afternoon to show up at the polls. And when the votes were tallied, Laura had beat her husband 26-8 in the votes. And it was just, the men could not believe what had happened. Like, where did this come from?
Laura became Umatilla's new mayor, and 4 other women stepped in and filled open town council seats. It hit newspapers everywhere. Woman mayor is pretty, clever, and diplomat.
It got a lot of press all around the U.S. was because people who were skeptical about women voting were terrified that women would be office holders.
First thing they did was pay the outstanding power bill so they could get the streetlights turned back on, and they, got roads paved, and they even arranged for a monthly garbage pickup. Like, they did all kinds of wonderful things to just help the community not just grow, but be a better, stronger community.
She made a huge impact in roughly 8 months as mayor. Historians say she didn't finish the entire term due to health concerns, moved back to Parma, lived with her mother and daughter, and died in Parma in 1960.
But the Umatilla women and Laura Starcher, with her wonderful Idaho connections, really proved that women could do a great job.
And they were the first ones to do something like that. And I think it paved the way because it showed other women what was possible and what they could do. And I think today even, they still set that example of, well, look what they did, we can do that.
Now, it's not clear what happened to her husband. There are rumors that she left the mayor role because she was pregnant with her daughter, but we heard her husband didn't follow her. Also, her death certificate shows that she is a widow.
Yeah.
during that time, a lot of people were shunned because if you were to get a divorce, they didn't like
Yeah,
that.
it was
So
kind of a bad
it's kind of, yeah.
I was fascinated by this story, so I looked into it a little bit as well, and I think what I found is that she had several nervous breakdowns, which is why she left office,
Okay,
moved back
yeah.
to Parma. She became a postal service worker again, opened a beauty shop, I think.
Yes,
And
yep.
what I love best about this is that her husband demanded a recount after that election.
So on that note, I mean, I guess I can see it. You know, the historians were telling me that they would be putting in the names, right? There's no official ballot at that time. You're
It's
just
a write-in.
writing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So they're like, no, they meant the husband, not
Right.
her. But obviously recount shows.
He eventually came around, though, to support her, and I guess endorse her because I love this quote. I don't love it, really, but I think it's hilarious. He came around and endorsed her to the Oregonian, saying she's the best housekeeper in the United States.
What a time. A show of the times.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so after that, what happened?
So we're still not sure what happened to Earl, right?
Okay.
She moved there. We couldn't really figure out what's going on, so don't really know. But women stepped into the role. We had 4 city council members, and then 2 other women filled, and then the men took it back over after the next election. So,
Showing what can be done.
yes.
Exactly. All right, thank you very much, Hunter.
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to tell you today that we've got some hints of blue in the sky today instead of it being completely gray. And the moderate air quality is the conditions that we're seeing across southern Idaho and eastern Oregon at the moment. It's also 94 degrees over in Boise. You can see a lot of those temperatures warmer than yesterday in the upper 80s over in the Magic Valley, and again 90s over in other Treasure Valley spots. However, that will shift starting tomorrow as we expect those highs in the Treasure Valley to exceed 100 degrees once again, and expected to stay there for about 5 days. So that kicks off another first alert weather stretch for us. And again, for tomorrow, we're expecting more of those highs above 100 degrees. McCall will be a little bit
on the less hot side, closer to 90. Twin Falls close to 100 degrees as well. The smoke will be sticking around as well. You could see a little bit of some better conditions for now, but the smoke does look to increase after that.
You know, every couple of years, we compile a list of athletes we'll be following as they pursue their Olympic dreams. Born here, raised here, went to school here, spent a few days training here. We proudly include them in Team Idaho. And in that vein, we've been tasked with coming up with some stories with a hook to the host country. Any affiliation to France is going to get us through this fortnight, I promise. Idaho has several places with a link to La République. Think Paris, Idaho, or Montpelier, Idaho. Bellevue, which means beautiful view, or Bruno, which means the brown or dark-skinned one. Speaking of skin tones, I think we can all accept these places we're about to talk about in Idaho were inhabited and likely named something else long before anyone with a European origin stepped foot in what would one day become Idaho. Idaho's French connection is scattered across the state, from the top, which is actually way off to the side, to the bottom, which is more near the top of the state. It's enough all over the place to make one malad, but it all goes back to the beginning. You see, following the footsteps of Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery, capitalists discovered there was money to be made in fur. By 1809, the Northwest Company set up a trading post on the banks of what was then called Kalispell Lake, named after the nearby Kalispell tribe. But the French-Canadian trappers dubbed it Lake Pend d'Oreille, French for hangs from ear because, well, they believed the natives wore earrings, except they didn't. About the same time, another lake to the south would be called Coeur d'Alene by other French-Canadian fur trappers. Heart of the all, it meant, because it must have been carved out by the Creator. But it also meant the local tribe, well, they were sharp. They had a talent for trade. Remember that reference to tribal jewelry that really wasn't a thing in Pend d'Oreille? Well, it wasn't a thing for the Nimipu either. But the Nez Perce were named for nose piercings they never wore. The French were laying their foundations in the south as well. We've all heard the story of Le Bois. The river that runs through Boise was either known as the Wooded River or the Boise River, depending on what language you spoke. Legend has it, French-born fur trapper, explorer, and U.S. Army officer Benjamin Louis Oulalale de Bonneville rode over the southeast foothills and exclaimed, "Le Boisé," or the trees. Despite no evidence that actually happened, the name stuck, and Fort Boise was built a year later. The future master of that trading post, Francois Payette, his name would take over the town of Boomerang in 1891. Oh, and Bonneville would bounce back too, getting his own county in 1911. You know, a couple of places have slipped a bit from their French origins. Think Du Bois, spelled and previously pronounced Des Bois, is a city in Clark County. Montpelier, Idaho's furthest southeast corner, way down there in the southeast part of the state. That was a stop along the Oregon Trail and called several different things before Brigham Young rolled through in 1863 and renamed it after Vermont's capital. All right, sticking with our Olympic theme, let's check our medal count for today. Pretty much everything's wrapped up in France, and right now the United States still continues with the most total medals. We've advanced, pushed that up to 30. France in second place, the host country with 26. China coming up third with 19. And you can see Great Britain and Australia bringing up the bottom five, or yeah, I guess that'd be the bottom five, with 17 and 16 respectively. Got several text messages today about Idaho's Attorney General's office, including Idaho's Secretary of State office in his lawsuit against the Open Primaries Initiative. Like this one from Jim in Meridian, who asked, why are some Republicans like Mr. Labrador afraid of open primaries? More important, why is he afraid of Idahoans voting on this issue? Jim seems to think it'll be because it will pass. Meanwhile, let's see. So Idaho's AG picks the teams of lawyers representing both his office and the Secretary of State. What are the chances he put in his most experienced lawyers on the Secretary of State's team? It's a great use of tax dollars, according to that person. It's not about a constitutional issue, says David in Boise County. It's about Labrador trying to make sure that non-Republican votes don't count. Well, there's actually a lot of Republicans on the side of wanting this to pass. So it is a wide open issue. We don't know who's on what side when it comes to Republicans or Democrats. We do know a lot of Democrats are on that side, but there are some Republicans on that side as well and want their vote to count just as much. Laura Starcher's story is yet another reminder women are the best leaders, says Jackie in Boise. That's a great point, Jackie. We'll see you tomorrow.